All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us for the Discovery Farms virtual tour today. I'm Nikki Wolf, the Education Program Manager here at King Conservation District. Today, we're going to hear from several speakers and watch a video tour and interviews from Blue Mist Farm in Enumclaw. So our agenda, we're going to start with some introductions and meet some of our project partners. Then we're going to meet the farm owners of Blue Mist Farms. We'll take a video tour of the farm and the project, and we'll learn more about the Discovery Farms research model and the manure management project. And then we'll save some time at the end for questions. So with that, I'll pass it over to Courtney Nauman.
Great, thank you so much, Nikki. My name is Courtney Nauman, like just mentioned. I am the Pacific Northwest Agricultural Stewardship Program Manager with American Farmland Trust and the project manager for the South Sound Discovery Farms project. American Farmland Trust is a national nonprofit that promotes sound farming practices, protects farmland, and keeps farmers on the land. We're often known for our No Farms, No Food bumper stickers. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we work on policy and land access and are keenly interested in being on the leading edge of innovative research projects to help farmers in a real way, which is where the Discovery Farms project fits into our work. Discovery Farms Washington was brought to the state by its director, Dr. Nicole Embertson, who is also our partner at Whatcom Conservation District, who helped us design this project. And our second partner is King Conservation District, helping to host the event today, who will now go and introduce themselves. Jay?
Hi, thank you for coming to the farm tour today. My name is Jay Miro. I'm a senior resource planner with the King Conservation District. For folks that don't know about the Conservation District, we're a special purpose district, and our mission is to promote the sustainable use of natural resources through responsible stewardship. And we do that a number of ways. We do one-on-one site visits, like you'll learn about today with what we did with the landings. We also help folks with forestry issues. We work with stream, buffer landowners, and we have cost share programs. We have educational events like this. We work with a lot of the cities within King County, as well as King County itself, to promote agriculture and natural resource conservation. We have a whole host of programs, and it's good to take a look at our website at kingcd.org and find out more of the programs that we have. And now I'll pass it on to Laura.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Laura Redmond. I work with the Landowner Incentive Program at King Conservation District. And this is a cost share program. We invest public funding on private land to implement best management practices to conserve natural resources. Courtney?
Thanks, Laura. So we'll go into introducing our landowners and farm hosts today. Hello, Sean and Beth. We're so appreciative that you're here with us today. It's really nice to have you here this afternoon to share the story of your farm and walk us through all of the incredible conservation work that you've done over the past few years. In our upcoming farm tour video, we'll learn more about you, but before then, I'm going to ask you some of the basics to provide a bit of an introduction to Blue Mist Farm. So first, can you describe the size of your farm and tell us where it's located?
We're located in Enumclaw, Washington, and we have 62 sheep, 12 goats, and 6 alpacas, and about 100 birds between chickens and ducks.
On 7 acres.
On 7 acres.
Great, thank you. And can you briefly describe your farming background? How long have you been farming there?
So we moved here 5 years ago. We've been here 6 summers. Prior to that, we lived in a subdivision in an HOA in Issaquah and had a 10-pound Yorkie. So we did a lot of learning before and visiting a lot of farms before we started our farm. And we started small with 3 alpacas, and it just kind of blew up from there.
Nice, thanks. 10-pound Yorkie to a farm is a great transition.
Yes.
What originally prompted you to contact and partner with KCD? You've done many projects with them, but what was that initial spark?
The original project that we were involved with was replanting some native species along the Newaukum Creek watershed. and our neighbor had actually done it first. And we found out about it there. And like Beth mentioned, we did some more research and found out what they did, and found out about all the different services that KCD offers through, even equipment sharing and things like that. So we thought it was, great. And, we rented like the hay probe to do hay analysis and some soil analysis. So the original was that 100-foot buffer planting in the back that we did to help restore some salmon habitat along the watershed.
Great, and we will get to see so much more of that in our video. Again, thank you both so much for welcoming us to Blue Mist Farm, giving us a few teasers, and being willing to really showcase all of the amazing conservation practices that you've already implemented. We're very grateful for you. So we'll transition to that video to show your farm up close, and Nikki will get us started.
Thanks. Welcome to Blue Mist Farm, and we welcome you with American Farmland Trust and King Conservation District to a virtual tour of our farm. So we've been here for 5 years, and we decided to start with alpacas on our property, primarily because I like the way they hum. We started with 3, and we added 6 more after that as rescues. All of our alpacas came as rehomes or rescues. And once we got through the first year with them and realized that small farms don't have shearers, we had to learn how to shear, which was challenging the first time. The next year I went to the shearing school at WSU, and that's where I really got introduced to sheep. And I came home from there and I told Sean, I said, we have to get sheep, because I fell in love with them. And at the same time, we had also added a few dairy goats to have some goat milk, because we enjoy goat milk, and a few Angora goats. Wouldn't do any more Angora goats here because of the rain. We end up with a lot of feet problems. So Angora goats and wet property don't work well together. But I have the few that I have, and I'm going to keep those. But now I'm up to 62 sheep. I run through different breeding. I'm produce for fiber, and we process our own fiber and sell it as roving and make it into yarn. And we also have a number of birds on our property. We have probably about 60 or 70 chickens and about 30 ducks between Muscovies and different types.
So they came out and we allowed them to plant native species plants in about 100 feet back from the embankment. And that's been growing in for about 4 or 5 years now. And, really easy. They came in, put the plants, they maintain them for 5 years, and then that's it. Their only request is that you don't, you fence it off and don't allow your animals to go on it and destroy all the things they just planted, which seems very, very, very reasonable.
Right, and coming into it and not having any idea of what a farm is or should be, it was great being able to have somebody come in and help us do a farm plan and to look at our property and say, this is what we recommend you do. There's no push at all, but just a lot of help. We've done a number of classes, not just through King Conservation District, but through the different conservation districts throughout the state that have been really great in helping us to learn about our land and how to take care of our animals.
My name is Jay Miro, and I'm a senior resource planner with the King Conservation District. And welcome to the Discovery Farms King Conservation District American Farmland Trust Farm Tour. The King Conservation District's planning process is a cooperative process where we work with the cooperator in order to create a plan that balances their goals with natural resource concerns. So we meet with the cooperator and we discuss what their goals are, what their operation is, future goals. And then with that in mind, we walk their property with them and discuss their goals, look for natural resource issues. Natural resource issues could be things with water, plants, air, animal, soil issues, and human issues. Then if we find a resource concern, we'll talk to them about it and make suggestions. So someone might have a manure pile that's too close to a waterway, and that might cause a water quality concern. Fecal coliform is a big issue off of manure, but there might also be sediment and nutrients. And if we find that issue, we'll make suggestions. Hey, can you move your manure away from the creek? Have you thought about other locations? Why is it here? And we might make suggestions like build a waste storage facility, like what we'll see today, compost the material. And working with the cooperator, we'll make these suggestions that they like, that works for their farm, that works for them. And if we can, we'll try and find funding to help pay for it. Water quality protection is important in the Newaukum Creek watershed because Newaukum Creek is an important salmon-bearing stream. And not only do fish use that stream, but people also want to fish, they want to swim, and recreate in water. So this is a tributary to the Green River, which flows into downtown Seattle through the Duwamish River. And so if we keep water clean out here in the rural lands, it keeps water clean down in Puget Sound and beyond. So doing practices to either protect or improve water quality is real important, not only on farms in the rural area, but also in the urban area as well. So the Lannings have installed several practices on their farm with the help of the King Conservation District. One of the ones we'll look at today is the waste storage facility, which kind of crowns a lot of the practices that they've done today. They've installed a heavy use area. This is a practice to help protect the pastures when the soil is either too wet or the pastures are too short. So typically we'll install sand or gravel in a small area. Heavy use area is one of the words. Sacrifice area is another one. Confinement area is another name for this practice. And the idea is we're creating a mud-free area where the animals can be during the winter so they're not negatively affecting the pasture. And because it's mud-free, we're not worried about keeping them in a smaller area. We're not worried about their health, and we're not worried about the effect of that water and mud on their hooves. In addition, we also help them install gutters and downspouts. The area where the heavy use area was really wet, and so during that practice, we removed the muddy material, removed all the manure that had accumulated, and put down this footing. But without gutters on the barn, we would have still had all that excess material flowing into the area. So the gutters and downspouts, and then those are directed into an appropriate spot, takes probably 40 to 50,000 gallons of water per year out of that area. So the gutters and downspouts are an important part in a system. In addition to those three practices, we also helped them install a native tree and shrub buffer along Newaukum Creek on the east side of the property. And this was a buffer that they worked with our restoration team. It's about 100 feet wide, and it will create shade along Newaukum Creek. Now, it might take a few years for those plants to grow, but shade is an important part of water health. Our native salmon and other aquatic creatures need cool water. And so the only way to keep water cool in the summer is to have shade on it. So in addition to the native plantings, it's real important, especially with goats and sheep and alpaca, who will eat every native plant you put in the ground. We helped them by installing a buffer, or they installed the buffer and we helped design it, plan it. And so that buffer fence keeps the animals out of the native trees and shrubs, allowing them to grow and do their job.
So with this project, we were eligible for cost share benefits through KCD, which absolutely makes these projects more attainable for small farm owners. Because honestly, profitability in an operation this size is almost secondary. You obviously want to at least be able to break even, but anything that you can do to help, and with the funding aspect to it, it's just much more of an incentive to follow the best practices.
The Discovery Farms model is results-oriented and producer-led. In our case, we have a producer-led steering committee that's guiding us step by step through the research that we're doing. And really, we're wanting to take a localized approach to knowledge. So instead of science sitting in a white paper that no one is ever reading and is really inaccessible, we want this research to be something that helps with the day-to-day, on-the-ground operations of multiple different types of farms, and specifically small-scale farms.
We became interested in the Discovery Farms when the project for the manure bins or the compost bins came up. That's something we didn't have on our property yet and know that we needed. We produce an exceptional amount of manure with the amount of animals we have, and we needed a better way to manage it. And we were very interested in learning the different ways how the different types of piles, be it a concrete bin or a dirt pile or something covered by tarp, which ours was all just open on the dirt at this point, what the different types of things were leaching out of that into our waterway. Like we said, it's been really, really wet here, and our water table is very high. So you dig a 3-foot hole in to put a post, and you're in water. So it's been very interesting to learn what are we doing to our property here by managing or mismanaging at this point our manure.
Everybody says this is what you should do, and this is what best practices are, and things like that. But I couldn't find what research said that was the best practice. Maybe, and again, you always try to get to best practices. You just might not have the ability where you are to fulfill all of best practices. So 50% of a best practice is better than 0. So this will allow everybody to have some at least some hard numbers from a low population livestock animal farm, and hopefully maybe give some basis for some other things to be researched to find out what's what the best take on everything is.
We really want to make sure that the information that we're gathering is going to be useful to land managers, and recognizing that the recommendations that we make often come at a cost. And so we're trying to look at the spectrum of doing a dirt pile or the do nothing option, which is a dirt pile uncovered. The next option up, which would be covering with a tarp, which is a little bit more economical. A concrete pad with no covering, and then a concrete pad with walls and a roof.
What's special about my farm is all of my animals. Like I said, I started with 3 alpacas and now have over 70 animals on my property. Everybody thinks I'm crazy. I can't remember half the people I know their names, but I can tell you the name of every single one of my sheep. They all have personalities. They're all very loving, and it's just joy to walk out every morning and be surrounded by animals who want nothing but love from you. And that's just my goal, is to raise happy, healthy animals, and they give back to me in the fleeces that I get from them. So I love what I do.
Great. That's so cool to see the video there. I know one of my biggest appreciations is that rogue rooster that came out a couple times. Special thank you to our award-winning videographer, Laura James with Beneath the Looking Glass, LLC, for her artistic vision in putting together that virtual tour. Beth and Sean, you have done so much. I can attest to how great you are at animal husbandry and implementing conservation practices. And I'm sure there's going to be so many more questions for you that arise out of our Q&A session. But we might talk about the Discovery Farms project first, and then we'll get to that more interactive discussion piece. So one of the most recent conservation practices that we saw that you implemented was manure storage, which is the area of our research together. Some of our listeners might be curious as to what the Discovery Farms is. What does that mean? The Discovery Farms model was actually originated by the University of Wisconsin as a better way to understand the impact of on-farm practices on water quality through applied field level research, outreach, and then understanding those efforts. AFT received funding from the Washington State Department of Ecology through their National Estuary Program grants to study water quality, specifically in the Puget Sound, last year. And this project seeks to generate local Washington-based information for manure storage so that farmers, like many of you who are watching, can make informed decisions about which type works best for you in the short term and in the long term. Manure, as many of us know, is a natural byproduct of farming if you have livestock that can be both overwhelming, but also beneficial to manage. If done right, manure can create compost to go back onto fields to enhance soil health. And if done insufficiently, it has the potential to unfortunately negatively impact our watersheds. We see farmers implementing manure storage on a spectrum, especially staff here at the Conservation District see this every day. There's the style of just putting your manure in a pile on the ground. And then there's a style that NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, often recommends, which Jay has called the Cadillac version of a practice, which is a 3-bin system for rotational composting with cement roofed bins. But we were curious, our project team was curious about what existed in that middle ground. What if a farmer wasn't ready yet to install cement bins? Maybe they wanted to in time, but because of our strict time these days, readiness or lack of resources, they weren't just quite there yet. Our project team realized there really wasn't information that existed in this gray area that was based in the Pacific Northwest's unique climate and soils. A lot of the information was for large scale operations or was based in the Midwest or on the East Coast. So we sought to find it. We call these treatments, and we were really curious about how different treatments of manure storage impacted water quality. Laura now will go into more detail about how we're doing so.
Thank you, Courtney. As mentioned, this study will be looking at how different dry manure storage treatments impact surface and groundwater quality. So in addition to help from our steering committee, our partners at Discovery Farms Washington and Whatcom Conservation District led us in the research design and installation of monitoring equipment for this project. So this pile is an uncovered manure pile on bare ground. And so during a rainstorm event, stormwater will fall both onto the pile and move down along its surface, as well as percolate into the pile. As this stormwater moves along and through the pile, it can pick up nutrients and bacteria and other microorganisms and sediment. Some of these things you really don't want in your compost, such as pathogenic bacteria like E. coli, but it also collects things that you really do want in there, such as phosphorus, excuse me, and nitrogen. And once this stormwater exits the pile as leachate, it can move along the surface of the ground or into the soil below, contaminating our surface and groundwater resources. And it also really can depreciate the quality of the compost that you get in your final product because you'll be losing some of those nutrients. So we will be evaluating the effect of 4 different manure storage treatment methods. The storage methods include covered and uncovered manure piles on either concrete slabs with walls or dirt pads. There are 2 dirt pad piles. The first is the do nothing option. It is an uncovered pile on bare soil, and the second pile is covered with a tarp on bare soil. We will be sampling the soil underneath each of these 2 piles to observe differences in how nutrients, fecal coliform, and other variables infiltrate from the manure pile into the ground. And so this photo here shows the two different dirt pad treatments before the manure was added. We took samples of the soil prior to adding the manure to have baseline data. And then we'll be moving the piles aside periodically, taking samples underneath them and to understand how these levels of these variables will change over time. The other two piles are on concrete slabs with walls. One is covered with a roof and the other is uncovered. You can see in this pile that there are two holes in the back of each of the bins. And so these bins are sloped slightly to the back. So during rainstorm events, the stormwater runoff will flow into these holes and then through those PVC pipes in the back, where we have water quality monitoring sampling equipment set up. And so each of these two bins has its own water sample collection system that will take samples throughout the rainstorm event. And at the end of the rainstorm event, the project team members, they'll come out, they'll collect those water samples, and then we'll bring them back to a lab. And we'll be analyzing them for nutrients, for fecal coliforms, sediments, and other variables. And in addition to stormwater runoff and soil samples, we'll also periodically be sampling the manure piles. These manure samples will help us to understand the composition of the manure piles in relation to those water and soil samples that we're taking. And then these samples will look at what the different nutrient levels are, like your carbon to nitrogen ratio or your browns and your greens. And we will also be keeping track of how often new manure is added and how often the piles are turned. When you turn a pile, it adds oxygen into that pile, and many of the bacteria that break down your manure into compost rely on that. So changes in levels of these elements, as well as moisture, really have a big impact on how quickly and effectively this manure is composted. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Laura. So the South Sound Discovery Farms project, like Laura just described on Loomis Farm, currently goes through June of 2021, and we're beginning to do water and soil tests actually this month. So we're hoping that everyone here can stay tuned for our preliminary results later in early spring, late winter, which we hope to share, and we're really excited about what story our results might have to tell. With that, I will kick it over to Nikki, and I think we're ready for some Q&A with the landowners.
Great, thank you all. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat, and we will ask the landowners or any of the project planners. And it looks like we have one question coming in. From Mary saying, very interested in hearing about options for small farms without heavy machinery. Large concrete systems look great, but seem harder to manage or turn by hand. Jay, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, there's all sorts of potential options for building a manure structure that's not the big concrete bunker. This particular location, actually there's two locations that we built these manure bins, are fairly windy. Down in Enumclaw, on the east side of Enumclaw, there are often 90+ mph winds. So wind loads, snow loads are really important. So this structure is a design that we worked with our KCD engineer to design a structure that will withhold those wind loads. That being said, the KCD does have other manure bin designs that we have that either don't require a permit. We have several designs that do not have a roof and do not have a concrete pad. So if you're not using machinery on a regular basis, or you're in a location where, well, Beth and Sean's tarp that they lay down might become their neighbor's tarp very quickly in the winter. So other parts of the county are not as windy, and so the tarp might be just as effective. So really the best way to find that information is we do have some pictures and plans on our website, kingcd.org. but you could also sign up for technical assistance, and myself or another planner would work with you, come out to your site, take a look at the area you're interested in putting some manure structure, and we would come up with some plans, share the plans that we have, and find a design that would work for you and your operation.
Great, thanks, Jay. And we'll send out a link for that technical assistance page at the end of the webinar, so everybody will have a link to that. We have a follow-up to that. Somebody said, agrees with Mary, has a wheelbarrow and hand tools, but no tractor, and also rent, so is a little constrained in terms of what I can put on the land. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you to sign up for technical assistance and have one of the farm planners come out and work with you. We have another question. Do you blow air into the pile to increase the rate of decomposition? Seems like the rain has ample access to let rain in. How dry does the pile stay given this? Would that be Jay or Laura, Courtney?
Yeah, I'll answer that as well. So composting is a 3-part recipe. And so the first part of composting is managing air, managing oxygen. So some bins, some farms that have tractors use that tractor to turn the pile, and the process of turning it incorporates oxygen. Those of us that are unfortunate or have just decided that a tractor is not appropriate, or money, or just whatever, it's not on the list, there are other alternatives to get oxygen in the pile. One of those could be a forced air system. And basically a forced air or a static compost system has a blower on a timer. And this is really simplifying it, but basically that blower would cause air to be forced in the pile at regular intervals. There's timing and there's volumes of air to think about, but it does speed up the compost process. The second part of the recipe of composting is managing water. In the winter, we have too much water. In the summer, we don't have enough. So in the winter, excluding water is real important. And that could be done with a roof, or it could be done with a tarp. The reason we want to exclude the water is because that water not only causes potential water quality concerns with the leachate that comes off, whether that goes into surface water or groundwater, which the Discovery Farms project is going to look at. But that water fills pore spaces. And when the pore spaces in the compost, in the manure, is full of water, it's not full of air or oxygen. So in the summer, we need to exclude that water. In the winter, we need to exclude that water. In the summer, it's kind of the opposite. What a tarp or a roof does is going to help keep the moisture in. And so by covering it in the summer, we can keep that pile moist, and the microbes and the fungal activity that we're trying to promote in the composting needs moisture. I will say again, with the oxygen, our fungal and microbes that we're trying to encourage in that pile need oxygen. So that's why that's important. And the third piece of composting is the carbon to nitrogen ratio. More carbon or more brown, bedding, dead hay, other material that comes from wood or straw, the more material like that that's in the pile, the longer it takes to break down. So managing that carbon to nitrogen ratio is an important part of that recipe. And I will just say that composting is part science, but it's also part art. It takes a little bit of finesse and timing and experiencing. Material like manure breaks down over time, but if we want it to break down quicker, that's where the art piece comes in.
Great, thank you, Jay. Sean and Beth, we have a couple questions for you. So we have a question, how do you manage your sheep manure in the non-pasture holding areas?
There was actually a picture of her raking it up. So the idea with the heavy use area is to kind of keep it clean. So yeah, she walks around with the bucket more than I do, and literally just flicks it up into the little bucket and puts it in our tractor bucket and puts it on the compost pile.
And if you don't have a tractor, a big Rubbermaid bin works really well as well to pick it up and wheel it out to your pile. But I pick it up every day in the afternoon before the sheep come in for the evening, because right now our nights are longer, our days are shorter, and they're in overnight. So I like it cleaned right before they come in for the night.
Great, thank you. So how did you choose what to do in what order on your farm? So after the buffer project?
We kind of did everything this year.
All at one time.
All at one time.
Is that a good answer? So I mean, we had gutters on our barn before, but they were kind of the snap together gutters, and they just weren't functioning very well. I had added what we call the lean-to, that little covered area on the side of the barn kind of last year. So we're kind of holding off on the gutters till that was done so they could be attached and just do it at one time. So if you have gutters, you got to figure out where the water is going to go. So we had to map out where the water was going to go. That whole area, unfortunately, just where our barn sits on the land, just collected. We called it Lake Lanning. It was just, the ducks and geese really loved it, but it wasn't great. The order is hard to say. That I guess you would say your land and your situation would dictate the order. Plan it out, get the biggest bang for your buck first, and then move on from there. It just kind of all came together this year.
We also doubled the size of our sheep herd this year, and I said I cannot do mud in that area for another winter. So that was a priority for us this year.
So yeah, we had eight dump truck loads full of arena sand put in that area, and we could use a little bit more, but it's a large area. Most areas wouldn't be that big, especially if you just had a few horses for a little run out or something like that. We don't do anything small around here. We do everything huge right off the bat. So it's nothing that we, it's just all or nothing, it seems like. So, but it all works out. Do what you can, and as you have money for it, and as the programming comes through. So.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? Or Jay, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, when I work with a cooperator on their property, really in some part I have to take off my farm planner hat and add my farm psychologist or therapist hat. I guess it's a farm therapist. A lot of times, and I'm guilty of this too, I love going to the hardware store, the lumber store, and getting a big load of lumber or fence posts and starting a project. But oftentimes the last bolt or piece of trim never get done before I'm like, yeah, let's go to the next project. So focusing and finishing projects is real important for people, not only in their house projects, but also on their farm projects, because it's real easy to start projects and it's very hard to finish them. So that's one of the things I like to talk about with folks I work with, is really focus on the fewest number of projects that you can. The other thing to think about is your farm doesn't need to be done in like 1 year like the Lannings did. These are projects that might take years to get to be the dream farm. So, and I think that's okay. It's all right to have a little messy corner that you didn't get to, but you want to, or a project that's less than don't get to, and there's some things going on. And as long as you have a plan and you work on it steadily, I think that it's great if you don't get to it all one year. Other things to think about, at least that I think about, is starting with projects like confinement areas, gutters, things that are going to allow you to do other projects. Getting that central part of the farm built and mud-free, especially if you have livestock, giving you a place to put them in the winter allows you to have more productive pastures in the summer. So then you can start thinking about doing rotational grazing. So that becomes the heart and soul of most livestock operations, is that heavy use area. Unless you're lucky enough to have much more pasture than the number of animals that you want to place on them, really the confinement area is a pretty critical place to start.
Thanks, Jay. So another question for Sean and Beth. Do you sell any farm products at Blue Mist Farm?
Yes, we do. So I shear all of my sheep and alpacas and my Angora goats, and we process all of our fiber into roving and some of it into yarn. We do sell the roving and yarn. I typically go to shows, all of which were canceled this year. And I'm working on getting them onto my website and onto an Etsy store. I also do make some finished products by felting things into I felt little 3D sheep and little pins and flowers for your hair. So a variety of different things.
And eggs.
And eggs.
She's kind of forgetting eggs. She loves her sheep, but she forgets that the chickens pay for the sheep feed.
Our chickens, we have enough chickens that we sell enough eggs to feed all of the sheep on our farm every year. So the chickens definitely have their worth, as horrible as they are as excavating everything for us.
They definitely dig up a lot of stuff.
They dig up a lot of things.
And, I also want to mention, our neighbor, Jenny Menace, she's had a few, she's at the Mason Jar Farm, and she's a CSA farmer. She does it full time. She's had a couple projects. Again, she was the reason that we found out about KCD. And she actually sells a lot of our eggs next door. So it's great. She's actually helped us out a lot. She's lived in Enumclaw, forever. And she gets, baskets together and sells vegetables to, on a pay per basket basis or whatever, and people pick them up, and sells our eggs over there. And, it's a great partnership with her. She's great, can't speak highly enough of her. She has farm days. She has a little school over there and things like that for toddlers and things. So, that's a big help, finding other people in the community that can help you. And, something that you have, they might be able to sell things that, they have, you might be able to use. We use some of her leftover vegetables and stuff. She just, throws them over the fence, and the chickens and animals eat them and
love them. It's a great relationship, and great to find partnerships with other people in the community.
Right.
That's great. Sounds like a wonderful neighbor to have.
Yes.
Okay. Great. We have another question that says, I get 1/2 to 1 wheelbarrow of horse manure daily. So I'm constantly adding a little bit to the manure pile. How does that affect the composting? And how do I know when to stop adding to one pile and start adding to another? So I think Jay.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, the manure keeps on coming every day. Have livestock, have manure. So there's a couple thoughts about that topic. It does depend a little on your situation, if you have manure bins or not, but you typically want a pile that's about 3 feet tall, pile maybe 6 feet wide, 3 feet tall. If you're composting on the ground with a tarp, you do want enough mass to get the composting process started. And what we find is roughly a 3-foot pile does that. In a compost bin, you'll be able to stack a lot higher because you have a back wall to push up against, or at least build up against, if you're not using a tractor. And so once it's, roughly 3 tall and 6 either circumference or wide, that's a good time to stop adding. That fresh manure will take longer to break down than the older material. So if you stop and then start a new pile, then you can let the whole first pile break down while you're starting to add to that secondary.
Great. We have a question from Leif. So he's asking, are we looking at one, the amount of nutrient retention in the manure compost for each of the storage options, or just at the runoff? And then 2, are we looking at the benefits of the added storage to nutrient utilization on the land application side of things and the potential reduction in field pasture runoff? So Laura, if you want to answer that.
Sure. So we will be looking at nutrient retention in terms of connecting that to our soil and water samples, but the purpose of this study isn't really to observe the differences in the treatments at impacting nutrient retention. So yes, but no for that question. And then the second question is, we are not looking at edge of field or pasture runoff, but there's actually another project that Whatcom Conservation District and Discovery Farms Washington is doing right now that is looking at that exact thing. So we're excited to see those results.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and add that the reason for that is because the funding for this project and the seasons of our earth don't necessarily align. And so something like edge of field monitoring wasn't possible with our current funding, but with future funding could be something to pursue.
Great, thanks. So Laura, this question will be for you too. Do you know of any grants or monetary resources in the state to build a composting system like these?
So in King County, we have the Landowner Incentive Program, which is a cost share program. The way this process works is that you first work with the farm planner and the farm team to evaluate and understand any resource concerns, and then they'll work with you to determine if the Landowner Incentive Program might be a good fit in King County, or if there are maybe other resources available depending on the size of your operation. So I guess the answer is it depends, but wherever you live in the state, there is a local conservation district that should be able to help guide you to the right resources.
Thanks. So we have another question. So it says, our property is on a slight slope, so all the water on the property slowly runs downhill. Would a level concrete pad keep the manure pile and all its microbes in place, or should we still be thinking about ways to buffer manure compost runoff on the lower portion of our property? Jay, do you want to take that one?
Certainly it could, but depends on what is at the lower part of the property. Is it a salmon-bearing stream? If so, we still would want to do some sort of buffering in addition to the compost system to help with shade and sediment from any mud or bare soil on the pasture, as well as spreading manure on the pasture, so that buffer could help with those things. But on a slight slope, certainly a compost system similar to this would allow you to have a spot to make composting tidy. That's one of the real benefits of a system like this. Instead of having multiple piles spread out over a large area, you have one structure that you invested money in, and now it's a nice clean area to manage that composting process.
Thanks. There's another question I'll direct to you, Jay. How often do you need to spruce up the sand in a heavy use area?
It depends on how often you clean it. If you're cleaning it regularly, that sand can last quite a long time. What I've seen is in most situations where someone is cleaning very regularly, you might have to freshen up areas once every couple years. Now it does depend, because you might have some livestock that insist on going to the bathroom in the same spot again and again. Or you might have an animal that goes to the bathroom right outside their stall door, and no matter how often you clean it up, you can't prevent them from stepping on it before you get it cleaned. And so in spots like that where they're always going in the same spot, or they're urinating in one corner, you might have to spruce that area up yearly. The more often an animal steps on manure, the more likely it's going to get ground into the footing. So that will also depend on the size of the area and the number of animals. So there's a lot of factors in that question. But you keep it clean, it's going to extend the life of that footing longer. You build a appropriately sized confinement area, it's going to keep the area cleaner longer.
Beth and Sean, do you guys want to add about your experience with this?
Well, we do have limited experience, and one of the things that we were really concerned with was the bedding material, or the heavy use area material getting into the fiber of the animal. Obviously, you don't have to worry about that too much with a horse, but with sheep, you know, they lay in it and getting sand. So that's why we did decide to go with arena sand that has a little bit more of a has small pebbles in it. Also, it's not just sand. So it's just something to consider depending upon the animal that you have in there. And one thing I might suggest is to when Jay was referring to, you know, them always going into one spot, you know, we have a lot of really heavy stall mats that we were going to put in certain areas. You know, so if you do have a high traffic area, that would protect the sand too. It is impermeable, so, you know, you do still have to watch it, but it can keep the, you know, especially like in the front of a door or something like that, it might keep that sand and bedding material in place a little bit better, so that it's just a harder surface for you to clean, but you still have the permeability around it so that the liquids, you know, run off into the sand. So just another option.
And we do have alpacas, and alpacas use communal piles to pee and poop, so that it's always in one spot for them. So it's that spot I've already can tell there's a slight dip where they always go. So we're going to just put mats around the stalls, the stall doors, because that will help definitely with them tramping, because as Jay said, as they walk out the door, they step in all the poop. They just finished eating, so they're pooping on their way out. So I think that'll help a lot.
Great. Yeah, we had another question on this same thread. What's the best footing for a sheep corral? And they commented, sand seems like it would migrate below the wool, and dirt gets muddy.
So far I haven't seen that. I have my hands on my sheep every single day, and I, as a person who grows it for wool and who shears them, because I do shear them all, I'm not finding that. I was concerned about that, but with the arena sand we put down, they don't roll.
Yeah, they don't. Alpacas roll, which we haven't seen them rolling in the confinement area at all.
No.
But they, you know, sheep don't roll and kind of grind it into their backs. You know, they don't usually lay on their sides. So usually when they're laying, they're, you know, they're kind of straight down and kind of upright. So, you know, we're thinking if there's sand, it's going to be on the outer fibers and not necessarily down next to the skin. But, you know, we thought a long time, and that some of this stuff was some of the reasons why it all got done this year, is because we kept thinking, we're like, well, what do we use? What do we use? What do we use? And eventually you just kind of pull the trigger and kind of figure out what, you know, with the best information that you have at that time. You know, but it's, I don't know of any other options, because we tried like hog fuel for a little while, but that kind of compost on its own, and it's good in certain situations, but not, it doesn't, you can't clean hog fuel. You can't rake anything. You can't rake any of the manure out of it.
And it gets tangled in the sheep fibers.
Yeah. So, you know, if you do have some sort of underlayment, it seems like I saw something about like hoof grit or something like that. We did look at that, and that's great. You know, if you can do that. I actually put landscape fabric, heavy duty landscape fabric. I went to a distributor and put that underneath of it as a support to it, so that so it's basically ground the landscape fabric, which is non-woven, so it is at least slightly permeable, and then 6 inches of sand on top of that. And our area is about 4,000 square feet, so it's pretty big. But it
So
yeah,
so far it's working
doing,
well.
yeah, it's doing
I've been very
pretty
happy
good.
with it.
So yeah, check back in a year, I guess.
Great, thank you. Just one last question. So how long does it take to compost the manure? And then what do you do with your manure once it's composted?
Go ahead, Jay.
That depends, right? If you're following the recipe, air, water, carbon to nitrogen, you can turn it into compost fairly quickly. If you just pile it and leave it and don't do anything with it, or use a lot of bedding, it can take quite a long time. I would say somewhere between 2 months and in that one extreme, it might be 6 to 9 months. However, with those forced air systems, you can get composting from when you start to when you apply in a month or so. So it can be really quick if you get all of the pieces of the recipe right, perfect. But typically it's a couple months if you're turning it by tractor or if you're using an alternative method to get air in. And then what do you use? What do you use the material with? Well, oftentimes spreading it out on your pasture is a good way to utilize the nutrients. The composted material supplies organic matter, as well as some nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. You do want to consider how productive your pastures are, how many livestock you have, and how many acres of pasture you have before you spread it. So there's a few things to consider there. Some people will use some in their vegetable gardens, and other people give their manure to their neighbors or their compost to their neighbors. In cases where you have far more livestock than the pasture could possibly absorb, giving it away is a good option as well.
Great. Beth and Sean, what are you guys planning to do with your compost?
Well, we actually this year we also bought a very old, like 1950s manure spreader that works quite well actually. So it's non-PTO driven, so it can just be pulled. It's wheel driven, so it can be pulled by a small lawn tractor or anything that you have. But we the other thing to consider with the composting and how fast that it takes, and Jay, you're welcome to correct me if I'm wrong on this, is the amount of browns that go into it. Or specifically straw. I am not a horse owner, so I don't even pretend to be one. But from what I've seen in a lot of horse compost material is there is a lot of straw because people use that frequently for bedding and things like that. So I would say, personally, I would think it seems like the more straw or dry grass, the more fibrous the material is that's going into the bin, it takes much longer for that to break down into a usable product. So if you can minimize it and just try to pick out the actual manure as opposed to that heavy stemmy material, it does compost faster and pack down faster. You do need some, but when I've seen people clean out and muck out stalls, I've seen seems like wheelbarrow fulls of straw and very little manure. We just try to do it like a top cleaning, just good as just the manure and pack down. Sheep tend to pack down stuff a whole lot more than horses, so it all comes up as a big mat anyway. So in the stall, it can be really hard to get up, but that's personal experience. What I've seen happen in our compost piles is the amount of fibrous material going into it.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share screen real quick. Thanks for all the great questions. I just wanted to close this out. We're just past noon, and we have contact information here. So please reach out to Courtney, Laura, Jay, or myself with any questions about the project or getting connected to different resources. And then you'll also receive an email at the end of this event to the email you signed up with through Eventbrite. And that'll have a link to our survey, and we would really appreciate feedback. This is our first virtual farm tour. So we would love any feedback from you about how we can improve events moving into the future. And then in that email, there'll be links to resources. So I saw one last question come up about getting connected to KCD technical assistance. So there'll be a link to the page and the sign up sheet for that as well. So then Courtney, if you want to close us out.
Sure thing. Thank you so much, Sean and Beth, for hosting us today. Laura James with Beneath the Looking Glass LLC for your artistic skill, Department of Ecology for funding this research, and the staff at KCD and WCD who made this tour possible. If this project sparked your interest, keep an eye out for our results that will be coming next year, and be sure to learn more at farmland.org or by subscribing to AFP's newsletter. Highlighting the incredible work of small farms and stewarding their lands shows just how important each of you are as private landowners in protecting wildlife habitat and water quality, especially in the Puget Sound region. So thank you so much for everyone listening, for tuning in today.
Great, thank you all. Have a good rest of your weekend.